Okay, well, it's a pleasure to have here with us Hisyar Ozsoy, who is a member of parliament in Turkey, and he's a member of the HDP. In the HDP, he's the co-spokesperson for dealing with foreign affairs. And he's here to talk with us in this series of interviews we're doing about people-centered responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, about the situation in Turkey, and about the response of the Kurdish population in Turkey and of the Kurdish movement in Turkey to the pandemic, as well as the broader political scene in Turkey and how the turbulence that is coming along with the response is affecting the Kurdish movement. So, as I say, it's a pleasure and an honor to be able to speak with you. So, just to begin, if you could tell us a little bit about how the pandemic has been playing itself out in Turkey, and in particular, how the Kurdish community has responded to the situation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeff, for the opportunity. I mean, we are all having a very difficult time, and Turkey, with a very high number of COVID-19 cases, is a particularly vulnerable country now. One thing is that the government has not been really transparent about the numbers, and really we don't know what is happening in Turkey. I mean, there are some official numbers there, but when we talk to the local people, to the doctors, physicians, I mean, the situation is much worse than depicted by the government. And we know that there were so many COVID-19 cases, say in February, even in January, but according to the government, everything started around March 15, and things are okay. We have lost so far about 5,000 people in Turkey, like hundreds of thousands of people infected. These are the official numbers, but as I said, the numbers are much worse. But unfortunately, the process has not been very transparent. And in this process, there are some groups who are particularly vulnerable, like the people in prisons, for example. Recently, there was an amnesty law which excluded political prisoners, but released so many other people, about like 100,000 people. They were released, temporarily released or permanently released. But not the political prisoners. We know that there are many COVID-19 cases within prisons, and that is a fact now. For some time, the government denied it, but now they accept it. But still, we don't know really how many people are infected, how many people died. We know some people died. Some of them were confirmed by the government, but the rest we don't know. And in Kurdish provinces, we are not just dealing with the virus of COVID-19. There is another virus, I think a much more dangerous virus, which is racist authoritarian politics of President Erdogan. Because, I mean, imagine, like, we are having a pandemic situation and people are scared. And of course, one of the first places that these people would go for public health is the municipalities. But most of the Kurdish municipalities run by the HDP, they have been seized unlawfully, and our mayors were sent to prisons, and they were replaced by appointed so-called trustees. Actually, we don't trust them at all. These are mainly governors. They are governors, appointed governors, Turkish governors, who are replacing popularly elected Kurdish mayors, while our mayors are imprisoned, also facing the threat of coronavirus there. And appointed Turkish governors, they are now ruling our municipalities, which have some resources that can be mobilized, during a crisis like the COVID-19. It's a pandemic, and many of the local people, Kurdish people, they really do not have access to already limited resources. So with the appointing these governors to replace our mayors, the government destroyed the already weak health infrastructure in the region. So we know that while in many parts of Turkey, according to the government, the numbers are decreasing. I mean, the numbers of infected people. But we know that in Diyarbakir, for example, where I represent, over the last 2 weeks, I mean, we are having record high number of COVID-19 cases. So it is increasing in Kurdish provinces, really. In Batman, in Diyarbakir in particular, more and more people are getting infected. And when compared with the rest of the country, of course, the health infrastructure is already very weak. And if you add all the kind of attacks, assaults on our municipalities, that is making people even more vulnerable.
Yeah, so could you talk a little bit more about what is the feeling on the ground, particularly in the Kurdish region, with respect to the situation that's unfolding? Is there fear? Is there a sense of solidarity, some sort of combination of these sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, the Kurdish people, I mean, many of them, they are already very poor people, right? And so many of them, they have to work. In Turkey, we did not have kind of a generalized lockdown. We didn't have it. It was only during the weekends and kind of limited in time and space. And so many poor people, and the Kurds are generally poor, they have to work to survive. So, I mean, you know, it is, of course, I mean, the government was having this campaign of staying at home, asking everybody to stay at home. But for many people, it's a luxury to stay at home, really. They don't have the resources. I mean, they have to go out, they have to work. I mean, you know, and you know, it's daily survival. So many of them. So in that sense, I would say, I mean, there is not much fear in that sense. And when you talk to local people, I mean, they would tell you oftentimes, oh, this COVID-19 is not going to kill us. It will be the Erdogan regime, or, you know, the state repression or poverty or these kinds of problems are going to kill us. It's very interesting to see, really. I mean, like, you know, while middle class people or those who have resources, or in Western parts of Turkey, when, you know, not all of them, but many of them have the luxury of staying at home, at least for a couple of months, the majority of Kurdish people, they do not have that opportunity, unfortunately. There is some fear. There is some fear. But as I said, I mean, the coronavirus is there. I mean, we are all trying to deal with it in our own ways. But I think the other virus, which is racism, which is this authoritarian politics, right-wing populism of President Erdogan, the police and the military being so violent against the Kurds, and these are much more important problems for the Kurds when you
Yeah.
talk to them. Yeah, and if you let me just say one more thing, I mean, given that the government and the state institutions are not very helpful in terms of helping people, as the HDP, we did initiate a kind of sister family program where we are trying to match people, I mean, families, those who can support, you know, poor families. And in that context, I mean, members of parliament, our remaining mayors and other people, we all somehow kind of, we are in communication with a lot of poor families, thousands of poor families. And given that the government is not doing much, at least, I mean, we are trying to not overcome this crisis. It's difficult. I mean, we do have very limited resources, but at least we are trying to kind of, you know, reduce the impacts of this COVID-19 on people. So creating these networks of solidarity among people is one way to respond. It's not enough, we know, and of course, I mean, you need to have huge resources, I mean, to deal with a crisis like this big. It's not, I mean, that, you know, some, you know, people trying to help each other. I mean, that's not the way to work out this problem. We need institutional resources, institutional support. We need to mobilize them. But in the absence of institutional support, I mean, of course, we are trying to mobilize our people. That is, you know, how we are trying to respond to it at the grassroots level.
And what's the situation with respect to the government policy around testing? Are people getting tested in sufficient numbers? How has that gone?
That is, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of tests being done in Turkey, but that is also geographically uneven. I mean, in many Kurdish provinces, I mean, well into May even, there were very few tests. In the Western provinces, the number of tests were very much high. But as I said, I mean, even that is not fair. I mean, the distribution of tests across the country. And for quite some time, we didn't even have labs in Kurdish provinces. Later, there was a lot of criticism, opposition, so somehow they also established some labs in Kurdish provinces, and the number of tests have increased, but still, I mean, it's not even, I should say.
And you've spoken a little bit about the political this political virus, this virus of Turkish nationalist racism towards the Kurds. Of course, the repression has continued amidst the pandemic. And if you could talk a little bit about more, because around the world, the economic consequences, the political consequences, the amount of turbulence that has been provoked by the crisis has really changed the political situation in many places. What is the lay of the land in Erdogan's Turkey right now? How has Erdogan responded politically?
Okay. So let me start by saying that Erdogan has been using this pandemic as an opportunity. Like, he does that whenever there is kind of a public crisis, health crisis, or some kind of a crisis. I mean, he knows how to make use of it as an opportunity. I mean, the way he used the failed coup attempt in 2016 to destroy the opposition, he is now using the pandemic to further its authoritarian policies and to consolidate its authoritarian rule. How he is doing that? For example, like, it was in May, mid-May, when Turkey actually declared one of the first instances of COVID-19, and only 10 days after that, they replaced 8 of our mayors and sent them to prison. And in May again, and while the whole world is busy with trying to find a way to fight the COVID-19, so Erdogan keeps sending people to prison. The opposition, in particular, the HDP. Recently, 2 of our members of parliament, the parliamentary mandate was terminated, and then they were sent to prison. Leyla Güven was later released because she had previously spent a lot of time in prison, so they deducted that amount from her current sentence. But somehow the government is making use of the opportunity. The people are stuck at home mostly. They cannot use the streets for protest. I mean, you can't really do much grassroots organizing, and many of the governors already, they say, because of the COVID-19, so all kind of protests or public meetings are banned, and that is how they justify it. Like, when we go, for example, to protest for, say, our imprisoned mayors, or when our members of parliament were sent to prison, and the police would come, they would say that the governor banned all kinds of political activities and meetings. Why? Because we're fighting the coronavirus, right? So this is giving them kind of a very strange justification. They are using it, but when it comes to attacking people, they don't actually, the police never has any kind of social distance, right? So you should see some of the, scenes from those protests. They are very violent, attacking people without even using masks or anything. They touch people. They are very aggressive in that sense. So Erdogan is using these pandemic conditions as an opportunity to consolidate his authoritarian rule. I would say similarly, like, say, in places like Poland or Hungary, like, there are some governments who are kind of, trying to seize this as an opportunity, of course. And like, even like, see, people are so much, for example, getting used to lockdowns or curfews. You see what I mean? And I suspect that at least some of the mechanisms of surveillance, of policing that are being instituted now will stay with us even after the pandemic. Now the government is kind of, testing, how to actually control and police the population. And I don't think that, at least some of the mechanisms are going to stay. So many governments are actually, for example, trying to bypass the parliaments, the public, and some technocratic minded people are there, and they are making all kinds of decisions about our health, public health, without consulting us. So many of the already weak or weakened democratic institutions in the country are pretty much declining. I mean, it's a big danger, I should say. I know, I mean, it's not, I prefer not to talk about these kinds of political issues in terms of kind of like using medical metaphors, right? Like defining authoritarianism as a virus. Maybe actually, I think it's problematic. We do that for political rhetoric, but I mean, this is not a pathological situation. I mean, this is the normality of Turkey. It is not an aberration. It is not an exception. It is not a sickness, actually. This is actually nationalism par excellence, the way it is being now implemented in Turkey. So just we wanted to correct that, because I mean, it is so somehow even attractive actually to use medical metaphors to talk about these kinds of issues, but then you kind of tend to pathologize. I mean, I think it is dangerous. So we are dealing with these kinds of problems. President Erdogan is, I mean, we know that the support to the government is declining very rapidly. His party got divided into three pieces. Now there are three parties there. I mean, AKP, and then we have the Future Party, we have the Deva Party of Babacan. So it is very interesting that a party which is kind of ruling the country and which got close to half of the the support of half of the population, got divided into three pieces. It is so rare. Like if you are not in power, yes, there are divisions within the party, but how come they have so many divisions when they are actually ruling the party? That's very interesting. So the kind of presidential system that Erdogan and his allies, ultranationalist allies, they have established is not sustainable. It is producing so many instabilities in the country. The economy is on the verge of bankruptcy. We have a huge financial crisis. Turkey can't borrow even some $10 billion, which is not big money for Turkey, but nobody gives money to Turkey. You see what I mean? And democratic standards are already declining. The media is under tremendous pressure, civil society organizations, the democratic society. And in addition to all of this mess, Turkey is also totally into the wars in Syria and Libya now. You see, there are all these kinds of problems there. So what Erdogan is doing, he is so unsuccessful with trying to deal with these big problems. I mean, but being unable to respond to all of these problems and find solutions, he is not able to do that. And what he is doing, he is investing in the police state. He is empowering the police, or what we call the repressive state apparatus, right? He's giving extra powers to the police, to the military, and now actually they have just passed a law on neighborhood watch guards, right? What we call the bekçi. It's kind of a paramilitary force now. So it seems that Erdogan knows that in the future he won't be able to have kind of popular legitimation, right? Through the elections. Like, how do you do? I mean, you go to people from time to time, and that is how you kind of renew that popular legitimacy. And Erdogan and his allies, they know that if they go for some elections, they are going to lose. So there won't be enough popular legitimacy. So what they are doing, I think they are preparing for kind of a huge battle, not by means of elections, but using the police or the police, the courts, the prisons, I mean, the general, the repressive state apparatus to silence the people. I think that is their plan. Because if we have ever some kind of elections, forget even democratic elections, just some kind of elections, the opposition will be able to defeat Erdogan and his allies. But now they want to stay in power. If they can't do that through elections, through democratic legitimacy, then they will be using all means of coercion this time. And now they are really investing heavily in those institutions.
Yeah, that's very disturbing. Very disturbing.
Yeah.
On the other hand, around the globe, we've witnessed in the context of this turbulence this really massive wave of demonstrations against police brutality emanating out of the United States after the brutal murder of George Floyd. Is
Yeah,
there any
yeah,
kind of sense that there could be a tipping point in Turkey where people also come out and
yeah,
resist or respond to
yeah.
this kind of police brutality?
Yeah, I mean, in Turkey, even actually President Erdogan tweeted about,
Yeah.
George Floyd, and, so the thing is, in this country, in Turkey, everybody is anti-racist
Mm,
as long as you don't talk about racism in Turkey. You
mm,
see, so they talk about the racism of Israel against the Palestinians. They can talk about racism of white cops in the United States against black people. But when you start talking about the number of Kurdish youth who were killed by the police,
mm,
civilian Kurds, right, young
mm.
people, even their intellectuals, they never get to that point. It is so disappointing, I should say.
Mm,
And because they love their police and their military, they are all nationalistic, and it's of course it's much more comfortable to criticize the racism of other people. That kind of rage is being accumulated among the Kurds, I should say.
mm.
And maybe some progressive people here and there are not many in the country, unfortunately. But unfortunately, I'm not optimistic about kind of a general kind of,
Yeah.
sensitivity about racism in Turkey,
Mm,
uh, so to speak. But definitely this kind of repression on the people, police brutality, the use of military force against people is actually causing a lot of rage being accumulated within the Kurdish community. And from time to time, that rage explodes. You really don't know, how it happens. For example, in 2006, I
mm,
myself was in Diyarbakir doing my fieldwork research, actually.
mm,
And all of a sudden, the whole city exploded. There were like days of uh, protests against the police, violence, and the police killed, I think it was 10 or 11 people. Then.
mm.
So, it was an urban uprising, a huge one. So now things are being accumulated, I think. And at one point, I think they're going to explode somehow.
Mm, mm,
So that is why you see the government, President Erdogan and his police and the military, they are trying to repress even the smallest voice in the public. Why? Because even the smallest action or voice can actually have a huge impact. If you think that, like, you know uh, kind of a small light within darkness, right?
mm,
They're so scared of it. For example, even when some 5 members of parliament, for example, they come together here in a place like in Ankara, for example, in front of our uh, uh, Ankara office. And this happened actually a couple of weeks ago. Members of parliament trying to talk to the press in front of our office. So
mm,
they were beaten up and hospitalized, actually,
mm.
and the people around them detained. These things, they happen. We somehow, in quotation marks, got used to it, not in the sense that we approve it or we are okay with it, but we got used to actually continuing with our struggle despite all this repression that is happening.
Mm,
Uh, I don't think that, the government is very aggressive, and it will be more and more aggressive. That's what we are expecting, because they can't simply rule, because they can't get the consent of people. How they are going to rule the country? More force and coercion and violence and death and killings. And they have been doing that. Honestly, over the last 5 years,
mm,
we have like more than 5,000 people in prisons. That many people who left the country, they are living like as refugees in European countries. You see, they are doing this. In the 90s, they have killed so many people, what they call like killings by unidentified perpetrators, or
mm,
enforced disappearances, the destruction of 4,000 Kurdish villages. That was
mm,
the 90s. So what happened? You see, so after every wave of repression, somehow we managed to get even stronger, I would say. I mean, that is kind of the dialectics of Kurdish movement in Turkey.
Yeah.
So they have the ability to hurt us, really, to give us some pain and suffering. That definitely they are masters at hurting Kurdish people. But then we have learned how to maybe excel our skills for survival in such difficult times. And each time they come to us with more violence, so we excel our skills for survival. I think we are going to survive this campaign of violence too, like
Yeah.
the way we did in the past.
Well, you've mentioned on a couple of occasions the situation of the political prisoners in general, and perhaps you could say a little bit more about what the conditions are in the prisons under the lockdown, since there are so many people who are imprisoned, in humanity in general, and in particular, if there's been any movement or any information about the plight of the most famous political prisoner, Abdullah Öcalan, in this period of lockdown.
Yeah. I mean, the isolation on Mr. Öcalan is continuing. I mean, from time to time, and not in a systematic way, the lawyers and some family members could talk to him briefly, and most recently through a phone call. He could talk to his brother, and we could get some news about at least his health. But that politics of isolation as an institutional mechanism, that's continuing, unfortunately. And the same goes with almost all prisons now, because the lawyers and family members are not allowed to have visits, face-to-face visits in particular. So that is why we can't get really a lot of information from within prisons. Recently, we issued a short report on the prisons and the situation of prisoners, and we shared it with relevant institutions like the CPT, or Human Rights Commissioner of the Council of Europe, and the UN too. So we are trying to create some awareness about the issue, but there are torture cases. We know isolation is a problem almost everywhere. And many of prisoners are having what they call disciplinary punishments, and we don't know for what. Honestly, the kind of ultra-nationalistic political climate in the country is most visible in prisons, because most of the guards and soldiers there, Turkish guards and soldiers there, they do have very clear racist motivations, and they view the prisoners not as prisoners but as enemies of the state, particularly political prisoners. So we do have a special commission on the prisons, parliament. Like, this is not the parliamentary commission, it is the HDP's commission, where our lawyers and some members of parliament are very closely monitoring the situation in prisons. But I can tell you this, almost every day we get some bad news from some torture case, some problems, some beatings in some prison across Turkey. And this is not just a couple of prisons here and there, but it is a generalized policy of isolation and torture.
Yeah, again, very disturbing. With respect to the platform of the Kurdish movement and the goal of and principles of democratic and federalism, could you maybe speak a little bit about the kind of lessons that we can learn in general from democratic and federal principles with respect to the kind of political and social environment surrounding this pandemic?
Okay. I mean, I think maybe we can have even a kind of generalized debate here, because I mean, the kind of problems that we are having in Turkey are also experienced in most of the Middle East as a region. And you see, when you look at our geography, I mean, from Egypt and Libya to Lebanon to Syria, Iraq, and almost everywhere, we do have so many violent conflicts, wars. And this is not simply because some crazy Shia and Sunni people, or Arabs and Turks or Kurds, they just kill each other for stupid reasons. It's not about that.
Mm.
There are, of course, imperial interventions, there are colonial or neo-colonial kind of factors there. But ultimately, I think in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world, we have not been able to organize our societies in a fair and egalitarian way. So there are two fundamental questions, if you ask me. One is the question of difference. I mean, how we organize difference, social, political, cultural, identity, whatever. And the second is how we can kind of share resources in a fair way, right? Which is the question of class, right? It's identity and class, basically. And we do not have any kind of a model in the Middle East, or I would say kind of even in the world, to organize difference and wealth. And democratic confederalism as a kind of egalitarian, even if it is a bit utopian, but it is a way to organize both difference and class relations in an egalitarian way. So we know there have been an experiment with this particular idea in Rojava. In Turkey, it is difficult, of course. I mean, the HDP does have a similar kind of ideology, even if not in exact, I mean, these terms of democratic confederalism. But we definitely, I mean, as a party in our program, we support every single principle that has been discussed with respect to democratic confederalism. In Rojava, you know, there was an experiment, an egalitarian society. I mean, people could imagine, and I would say partly they were successful there. I mean, they could establish an inclusive society, popularly elected councils coming together, making their own decisions about themselves, gender equality, a friendly relationship with nature, right? I mean, communal economy. These are the kind of fundamentals, right? An ecological society, almost direct democracy. So definitely, I mean, I think the big problem that we have, we really, I mean, the nation state as a political form has not been able to organize difference and wealth in an egalitarian way. That's why we are having so many problems and why people kill each other. I mean, in, say, the Middle East, people are like, I mean, they kill each other because, I mean, unfortunately, we haven't been able to organize our societies, economies, and political systems in fair ways. I mean, you know, when you have so many conflicts, contradictions, inequalities, injustices, I mean, you know, people keep fighting. So democratic confederalism as a critique of the nation state as a political form, I think is a big opportunity for us to think about these fundamental questions of difference and class, right? And by difference, when I talk about difference, I just don't mean cultural difference, like all kinds of difference, all kinds of identities. It can be kind of like from gay and lesbian movements to gender politics to even ecology, religion, sect, ethnicity, racial identity. So it's a huge spectrum there, and democratic confederalism, with its highly decentralized and autonomous kind of spirit, helps to organize, you know, these differences, and also with its communal economy, it is also an answer to the kind of deepening class conflicts, both in the region and globally. So in that sense, I think, you see, so now we have the COVID-19, it's a global pandemic. And there are two ways to go, maybe, to possible impacts of the COVID-19. On the one hand, this process may empower authoritarian kind of regimes, like it is happening, say, in Turkey, in Hungary, in Poland. We don't know what's going to happen in the United States, but who knows? Maybe this whole COVID thing may empower President Trump as well. We really don't know. We will see what's going to happen in Brazil. So what I'm trying to say is that the kind of pandemic conditions, they may promote more authoritarian kind of governments, or they may actually encourage people to think, about, the kind of questions that we are discussing in rather different ways, more egalitarian, maybe more ecological approaches to think about and try to, address these kinds of issues. So in that context, I think one may be able to insert the debates on the democratic confederalism, because ultimately it is about how we organize our societies.
Very much
so now, the pandemic is revealing the fact that we have organized our societies and economies, including our health systems, in such a horrible, terrible way that even a person like Macron, the president of France, was saying that actually public health cannot be left to the mercy of some companies. He is the golden child of those companies. But even he was saying that, like, we need to think about public health in probably more communal or collective terms. So it is an open debate there, but I think now there is much more space to kind of promote the ideals and principles of democratic confederalism, given that the existing systems are really crumbling into pieces.
Yeah, very thoughtful. Thank you for that. With respect to the question, since we open up the question of thinking communally, collectively, the question of international solidarity. What do you think international solidarity with the suffering of the Kurdish people, the suffering of the Turkish people more generally, what international solidarity can and should look like?
I mean, as the HDP, we define ourselves actually as an internationalist party. And the kind of struggle that we are having in Turkey, we know that if we are successful, it's going to really impact a lot of progressive movements, both in the Middle East and Europe. Why? Because President Erdogan does have a very key position in Middle Eastern and European politics. And so some kind of radical change in Turkey, I think, is going to change the whole kind of political topography in Turkey and beyond. And we do have a lot of, relations with almost all progressive forces in Europe and the Middle East. In Europe, and not just with political parties, with the left, the Greens, Social Democrats, Socialists, even some conservative people who culturally conservative but politically progressive, except for the really ultra-right fascists. Except them, we do have, a very powerful network of solidarity with, a lot of political forces, many of whom were actually also present at our recent Congress in February. And in the Middle East too, we do have a lot of relations too. So we need to promote internationalism because, at least because the dark forces of capitalism, of racism, of patriarchy, all these reactionary forces, they are somehow working together against us. Even if not for some ideological reasons, but out of practical necessity, we need to come together. The progressive peoples and classes, we need to, because those against whom we are fighting, right, our struggles, they are very close to each other. They work together, right? That is one necessity. I think it is very important. Actually, before joining you in this kind of program, I was writing a message to the Dutch Socialist Party. Actually, tomorrow they have their Peace Day, and I was talking about the need for international struggle. I was writing a message to their youth organization. In particular, tomorrow they have an online meeting. And there I realized that actually, like, the kind of struggles we are having in our individual countries, in our cities or neighborhoods, are not really that much isolated from each other. They're kind of like small streams or creeks that are flowing into and forming a big river, right? I was using that metaphor actually. And when, for example, I am now thinking, if the people in the United States of America, if they can get rid of, politically, a person like President Trump, I'm not saying the world is going to be a paradise, but many things are going to change, including the conditions, the global conditions under which we are trying to actually make a change and, push for political transformation. For Rojava, there may be consequences. So in that sense, I mean, the same goes for, say, the United Kingdom. For example, I mean, the recent elections, Jeremy Corbyn, and, it was a very disappointing result for all of us. So, when we think in this sense, or when the right-wing parties are coming to power in many European countries, of course, I mean, movements, progressive movements around the world, I mean, they do have more and more pressure on themselves, because like the regime in Turkey, I mean, they do very closely work with all kinds of repressive authoritarian governments. So there are all kinds of relations. We know, for example, President Erdogan and Orban, and they are very close to each other. They're friends with each other, actually. Or Erdogan and Trump, they call each other over the phone.
Yeah.
And then you see, all kinds of problems that people have. So thinking, in these terms, I think, I mean, we have to. I mean, of course, ideologically, we are for international struggle. But we do believe that, I mean, the borders and boundaries that exist, they are very limited. We need to go beyond all those borders towards kind of a kind of universalistic kind of humanity. Although being critical of, all connotations of universalism, but somehow, without kind of disregarding the question of difference. But, we are fighting for all people. That's our claim. So this is more kind of an ideological point, but from the point of practical necessity too, we need to come together. We need to actually form internationalist platforms where we can exchange ideas about our political struggles. I mean, we can learn from each other. I mean, what is happening now in the United States, I think, is very informative at one point. I mean, we are learning from them. It was so interesting that, for example, in certain cities, people are declaring autonomy the way
autonomous
it happened
zones.
in Russia. Autonomous zones. So it's interesting. I mean, it may not be sustainable there. I mean, they may crash it. But what I am saying is this:
the
I mean,
aspiration is interesting.
I mean, both the aspiration is there, and also all of these problems are revealing the fundamental flaws in the systems under which we are living, right? So I don't, to what extent, I mean, these efforts will be successful is a different issue, but definitely they are deciphering all the ills of the capitalist system that we are having. I mean, it can be the COVID-19 or the racism that we have there, or the problems that we are having in Turkey. I mean, if you know how to read them, they are kind of a lens into the ills of our societies, of these societies, of these political economic systems. So in that sense, I mean, although I mean, I think the general tone of our interview was quite pessimistic, but I am optimistic in terms of, I mean, so that was the pessimism of intellect, right? That's how they say it, right?
Optimism
So,
of
but I am optimistic in the sense that, I mean, they can be very repressive and authoritarian, and they are doing their best to, repress our societies. Any kind of democratic kind of initiative, they are so violent and aggressive there. But somehow, I mean, like, I'm just thinking about the story of Kurdish people in Turkey, their history here. 100 years, 30 rebellions, hundreds of thousands of people killed, genocides were implemented, not one but many times. I mean, the whole Kurdish countryside was destroyed. Like tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people were left to rot in prisons. But at the end of the day, you see, we are here, we are going nowhere. And of course, I mean, that's what I mean. Like, we are excelling our skills for survival. And this is happening within a historical context of state violence and repression. I'm not saying it is easy. It's very difficult, to be honest. I mean, for example, recently we are dealing with this issue that the Turkish government is destroying graves and graveyards of people already dead. I mean, they kill people and then the families bury their dead. So they go and they destroy the graves and, you know, the cemeteries, the gravestones. I mean, uh, so I mean, sometimes you kind of, you can't even imagine the ugliness of state policies. I mean, they don't know any limits, and that would, of course, it pains people. You see the families, you see, you know, their loved ones. I mean, you know, in that sense, I'm saying we are actually hurt emotionally, sometimes physically. You know, they send you to prison, they take you out of parliament. I mean, they can do all kinds of nasty things. That is their job, of course. I mean, they are defined, but by what they do. That is the state per se. I mean, in Turkey, this is how it works. But then, you know, in 2015, we destroyed President Erdogan almost. I mean, he was going down. Okay, and then he became aggressive. In 2019, in the elections in Istanbul, in Ankara, in many Kurdish provinces, we kind of destabilized, I mean, the whole political system in the country. And now we are preparing for another battle. It's going to come, you see. So we are going nowhere under these very difficult political circumstances. We are preparing for a final battle. And I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic, not simply because we are right. We are on the right side of the history. I mean, that is definitely the case. But I think the kind of political system that Erdogan and his allies, they established in this country, is not sustainable economically, politically, socially. There is a constant crisis and chaos there. Chaos may not be that bad all the time, but their chaos, the kind of chaos produced, engineered by them, is very bad for the people. And so I think we are close, and there is a general awareness in the society that, you know, it's time to get rid of these guys. Otherwise, I mean, they're going to destroy the whole country.
And the world. The world.
Too, yeah, definitely, because Erdogan is attacking Libya, in Syria, in other places. It's not just one person. I mean, here, you know, I don't really care too much about President Erdogan. He's a person. You know, history and society, they always survive individuals. I mean, there have been like individuals in history like who thought that they were bigger than history, but that's not the case. I mean, you know, they can't survive history, so they will be gone soon. Erdogan too. I mean, he's not a big problem, I should say. He's a problem, but the problem is really, I mean, how we are going to reorganize our societies, our economies, our political systems. That is the big problem. And then again, we go back to kind of like the kind of political frameworks like democratic confederalism or democratic autonomy that is in our party program, for example, or as the HDP in Turkey. So I think this crisis situation is providing us with a lot of opportunities. Sometimes people ask us like what the HDP is doing. I mean, given that there is so much pressure on the HDP. And I say, I truly believe in this. I say, we are doing much better than President Erdogan. I mean, the kind of problems that he has to deal with, first of all, to feed at least 85 million people in Turkey, to find jobs for the young people, you know, to support universities, to fight multiple wars in the Middle East. I mean, he doesn't have to, but he chose to. So, you know, in Libya, in Syria, he doesn't have any money. Nobody is lending him any money. So, I mean, he does have so many problems. And then he gets angry and he gets back to the country and, you know, he attacks us, the HDP. I mean, that kind of aggression is actually a symptom of how weak and fragile he is. I mean, and by him, I mean the kind of political system they established. And I think, I mean, it's all about whether they can break our political will or not. I mean, as long as we know what we are doing, as long as we can kind of defend our political position, in prisons, outside, I mean, doesn't matter really. I think he won't be able to win this struggle.
Yeah, well, very interesting, very interesting. Thank you for such a stimulating discussion. And do you have any last words or messages you want to get out to people?
Yeah, I mean, particularly for the international community, those who are listening to us. And by the way, my special thanks to people in England and the UK and We have been actually having a lot of relations with them, and they have been very supportive. People from the Labour Party, from Sinn Féin, from you know, our Welsh friends. I mean, the Scottish friends. So my special regards to them, and also I would like to ask all of them to find their own ways, to kind of contribute to our struggle here in Turkey. And why I am saying that, as I have already said previously, if we are able to overcome the kind of this political system established by President Erdogan, there will be many consequences for the Middle East and Europe too. So it's not just an isolated, individualized struggle that we are having here. And I think there are ways. And recently we made a call to actually all progressive forces that we are in dialogue with. So there are ways that they can actually be part of these struggles. And this kind of struggle here, I mean, and we want them not to think like we are having the HDP and the Kurds are having a struggle, their struggle there, and we are helping them. I think that is not a good way of formulating that relationship. No, I mean, we don't want them to help us here. We want them to help themselves by also taking part in the struggles in different parts of the world. I mean, and this is valid for us as well. I mean, trying to find a way to become, part of those struggles, right? And that is true solidarity. It's not just some people helping some other people for some political goal. It is like, solidarity is different. It's mutual. We need to empower our struggles. Ultimately, our struggles are kind of, at one point, when successful, actually they converge and, they open up new possibilities for people, not only in our countries, but beyond too. So in that sense, I think it's time for individuals as well as groups and movements to think about really very carefully specific and concrete ways to be in solidarity with other parts of the world. And I let me also say, like a place like Syria, Turkey, now Libya, you are seeing, right? And these places where we have these really, I mean, tense conflicts, right? And the results of those conflicts will have kind of regional and global impacts. Syria is a small country, for example, but the way the future of Syria is going to be shaped is going to reshape the whole political kind of topography of the Middle East. Syria is a small country, but like Israel, like Saudis, like Egypt, like Turkey, Americans, Russians, everybody is there. And it's kind of a microcosm of the Middle East. All problems in the Middle East, somehow they reveal themselves in Syria as well. The Shia-Sunni rivalry, Arab-Israeli conflict, Turkish-Kurdish conflict, oil politics, water politics, the Cold War, everything is there. That is why nobody can resolve the Syrian question, because all kinds of like problems, relations, factors, they come together there, right? So Turkey, I think, is a very, very interesting and important case in that sense. The way we shape the kind of political culture and system in Turkey is going to be so important in terms of Iraqi politics, Syrian politics, Libya, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, and Europe too, right? So in that sense, I mean, we want people not to think that they are somehow helping people far away. No, I mean, this is their land too. I mean, ultimately, we are all citizens of this global earth, right? It's one world we are living. So we want them to find their own ways and join the struggle. And not just the struggle, I think the victory that's going to come soon, hopefully.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.